Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You find us online at virginiainstitute.org, and we have archived editions of this program on our YouTube channel. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. The word union is going to come up frequently during this program. If that word triggers you, I don't know, maybe wear a mask, it'll help. But the first segment is going to be about the Senior Citizens Union, also known as AARP. And on the Newsmakers line is Phil Kerpen, president of American Commitment. Phil, welcome back to the program. I hope everyone is well in your world.
We are doing great, and great to be with you.
Well, I'm glad everyone is keeping well. We've talked frequently in the past about the American Association of Retired Persons and what they don't do for their members. And, catch us up on what the latest is, because it seems like they continue to take the money from seniors, the one population cell that seems to be replete with the comorbidities to put them at risk of COVID-19, yet seems to be doing very little to advocate for their well-being in this.
Yeah, I've been sort of amazed the extent to which they've been mostly on the sidelines when, my organization's really been at the forefront of fighting for protection for the nursing homes and other long-term care facilities, which is where the majority of the deaths nationally with COVID have been, which is astonishing when you think about it, because it's about 1% of the population. They've had half the deaths. That really tells you the extent to which this is overwhelmingly a problem in the long-term care facilities where we have our oldest and most vulnerable. And you might think, this is the seniors group, they're going to be fighting for the seniors who are most vulnerable, most at risk. And they've sort of weighed in a few states a little bit, but they've kind of had to be dragged to it because it's been mostly Democratic governors that have made the most catastrophic mistakes with respect to that population. And AARP is very close to the Democrats, and they're ideologically left-wing. And so I think they've been very hesitant to criticize them. But, it's interesting, Joe, even if you look among seniors, and really interesting data just came out from Florida on this. If you look among seniors, the death rate between the general population versus people who are in the nursing homes, the long-term care facilities, is just a stunning difference. It's more than 5 times as deadly for people aged 65 to 74 if they live in a long-term care facility than if they live in the community. It's in Florida, 2.9% of seniors aged 65 to 74 who've contracted coronavirus have died if they're not in a long-term care facility. If they are in a long-term care facility, it's over 15%.
Holy cow.
So that is where it's extremely dangerous, because that's where you've got your sickest, most vulnerable people, the oldest, the frailest. And so that's where you've got to keep it out of the facility and do everything you can to identify it and get it out. Among the general population, the risks are much, much lower. For people under age 65 in Florida, they have a case fatality rate of 0.3%. And so it's not the under 65s who are at risk. It's not even really the over 65s outside of the long-term care facilities, although, they're at, 10 times higher risk than the under 65s. But really it's the long-term care facilities where they're at 50 times the risk, where we've seen most of the disease burden. And, AARP had to sort of be dragged into saying anything about that. They finally criticized the governor of Michigan for her policies, but they've not been major advocates in this. But they do have time, this is interesting, this is what we wrote about, they do have time to advocate strenuously against Trump's reforms of investment advisory regulations, which is interesting because they've got some branded relationships with some investment advisors. But this was a situation where the Trump administration is fixing a crazy Obama rule, and the Obama administration did something called the fiduciary rule, which sounds good in its one-sentence version, which is investment advisors ought to have a fiduciary responsibility to their clients, to act in their best interest. And that makes sense. I think most people would agree on that. But when the Obama administration wrote up the rules that they described that way, they were like 500 pages long, and they were just total micromanagement of every aspect of retirement savings, which of course drives up costs, drives independent advisors out of business or to merge into larger organizations. And so it would have dramatically reduced the choices that are available to seniors who are planning for their, or people who are not yet seniors who are planning for their retirement, and would have really diminished investment options. So it was a very poorly conceived rule. The Trump administration, AARP supported it anyway. The Trump administration is now fixing that rule. They are going to harmonize with new SEC rules that do have that basic principle, but don't have the hundreds of pages of detailed and prescriptive and intrusive rules and regulations attached to it. And AARP said they're against the Trump administration's reform of this, and they weighed in. They want an extended comment period. They want to stall it. They want to delay it. And it just struck me that it was hugely ironic that they're weighing in on fiduciary rules for retirement plans and investment advisors when they just got a lawsuit dismissed in Ohio by arguing that they have no fiduciary responsibility to their members and that they have no responsibility to accurately disclose their business relationship with United Health, from which they benefit to the tune of 5% of every single health insurance policy they sell to their members. And so, they themselves, to get out of legal hot water, say we have no fiduciary responsibility at all to our membership. It's just a business relationship that we have with our membership. But then they want the strictest, most prescriptive Obama-style regulations possible on investment advisors. It just seemed like a huge contradiction. That's why we wrote an article about it.
Well, and Phil, you identify something that I think is crippling the concept America in the first place. We hear the protest marchers talking about systemic racism. I think it's systemic cronyism. It is, get big enough to get a seat at the table and then help write the rules to help keep somebody like, whether it's 60 plus or AMAC or anyone else that might come along in the sea, or even just a free market process towards retirement plans to keep them out of the business to protect the percentages that you're getting. That's what I see in so many places. And here's just another example of somebody who gets big enough, then gets a seat at the table and helps write the rules that keep down any competition that might force them to be better stewards of their members.
Well, I think there's a lot to that. Recall that AARP supported Obamacare when calls from their members were running 14-1 against it.
Right.
And one of the things they got in exchange for that, and besides the fact they're sort of left-wing in their politics already, so they were probably inclined to support it, one of the very concrete things they got from that is there was a carve-out written into Obamacare that allows Medigap plans, which is their principal line of business with United Health, to exclude pre-existing conditions. They were the only plans that were allowed to do that anymore after Obamacare. And it's pretty hard to defend that as a policy matter. If you think pre-existing condition exclusions are wrong and evil, I don't know why you would allow them for Medigap plans, and yet they wrote it that way, probably as a reward to AARP for their support. And AARP has made literally billions of dollars as a consequence of Obamacare driving more demand for their Medigap policies, which has been their cash cow. And in fact, they make more money now on an annual basis from their 5% VIG on all the United Health policies they sell, their exclusive health insurance partner, than they make from their total membership dues. So that's their principal line of business. And yet, when they get sued and seniors say, you had an obligation to disclose that you are an insurance reseller and you're making a royalty fee on every one of these that you sell, and not represent that as the best plan for seniors to your members when it may not be. They said, hey, we have no fiduciary obligation to our members. It's just an ordinary business relationship, and they got the case dismissed.
Well, and they use, if I understand, and I think the last time we had you on that case was just being heard in court and catching us up on the fact that they were in court denying their responsibility. But this is where the cunning linguists, the lawyers, make their bones, is they say, well, that word is not and therefore that changes the whole definition. And, it really starts to make you want to find your own pitchfork and torch.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, look, I think most people would be absolutely shocked to learn that AARP goes to court and says we have no obligation to our members.
Well, so for example, the Virginia Association of Broadcasters will go to Washington to lobby against changing the tax exempt status of advertising, and we get a bag full of mail saying you're dodging your responsibility, and how could you be a member of this because somehow we're avoiding tax collections from big greedy corporations that I don't know, want to sell their products to somebody, and listen, I'd be fine if everything was tax exempt. I'm thinking at this point, $30 trillion, we could just take a year off from tax collections in general. But Phil Kerpen is on with us with American Commitment. Phil Kerpen is on with us with American Commitment. Is AARP's model dangerous in the fact that it builds this idea that if you find the right target group, like seniors, for example, you can find yourself immune to all sorts of things that the average American would have to face, whether we're selling insurance or providing health care or just even doing travel advice for that matter, as long as we have the right group that we claim that we're associated with, you can't argue with us, whether it be an ethnic group or an age group or a gender-specific group?
Well, I think a lot of these organizations build themselves up so successfully in terms of their marketing and sort of their political positioning that they can then pursue sort of their own business interests or their own narrow financial interests or their own ideological agenda, and it's still perceived by the public and by elected officials as representing the whatever constituency it is they claim to represent. And that's a real problem because, particularly with AARP, every round of healthcare reform debate we have in Washington gets severely distorted when, United Health has this reseller relationship with a group that is perceived as a voice of seniors, because it means the insurance industry has sort of an ace up their sleeve. They can deploy, they can pretend to speak for seniors by having their business partner carry their message, and I think that's one reason that the insurance industry always seems to win. They always seem to come out ahead every time someone goes after them. Remember Democrats were going to ban private insurance and scrap them, and somehow they ended up mandating them instead, driving massive business to them. And so I think the ability to have a group that is perceived as speaking for a major constituency, a major block of voters, but really is beholden to a special interest is extremely powerful and extremely corrupting on the policy process, unfortunately. And you see it to a lesser extent with some of the other examples you gave as well, where you have entities that are perceived as representing some particular constituency, but are actually captive to their own interests.
Well, let me circle back then, at this issue with the seniors, as is so frequently the case. Phil Kerpen here with American Commitment, president of, author of Democracy Denied, GreatPeaceTownHall.com, where we're going to share this AARP to seniors. We're not accountable to you about this court case, but in general, these organizations, these unions, if you will, wind up really almost being more detrimental to the members than they ever are beneficial. It seems to me, Philip, just as somebody who for 30 years has been working as a pass-through to a lot of these stories.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. What we need to do and what we're trying to accomplish is just change the way elected officials perceive advocacy messages coming from groups, and understand that they may not speak for who they claim to speak for.
But the concept of America was always that the advocacy was the individual, not the group, and that the reason we weren't a democracy in the first place, pure one, was to protect the individual from the mob. And though I certainly am not saying that the seniors that are a member of AARP are a mob, this certainly seems to be the behavior that one would work on, whether you're a mob of protesters around a Civil War monument or a mob of protesters at an affordable health care congressional hearing.
Well, the problem here is that I don't think the members necessarily understand the extent to which the organization doesn't represent them, and make the point even of arguing in court that they have no obligation to do so.
And then they'll go out and say, look, we don't have an obligation, so nothing to see here. Move on. Make sure your check is payable. I think we got into this the last time you were on, and really, sadly, I don't think there's really an option for what AARP does. But I mean, is there really a need for AARP anymore? Is this sort of I guess not axiomatic connection between seniors and being an AARP member anymore, but has it jumped the shark, Phil? Is AARP really necessary for a senior, whether or not there's another organization that would replace what it does? Does AARP really provide all that much for a senior that might be a member?
Look, some people like the discounts and the deals and that kind of thing. I tend to think that in this day and age, you could find a discount and a deal on almost anything just by Googling it. So I don't know how much you need to really join an organization to, get access to that kind of stuff. That said, if people like it and they perceive a value from it, I don't have any problem with people being part of it. But you got to understand that they're principally a business. They make most of their money from United Health. When they are selling you an insurance product, it's not because it's the best product for you. It's because they make the most money from that, and they've got all these arrangements. And so, if you go in with your eyes wide open and you see value there, I think that's fine. But I would just caution people to be careful, particularly when it comes to health insurance products. Understand they have an exclusive deal. You're never going to see something from them from anyone but United. And so if it turns out that there's a different company that had a product that was better for you, you're never going to find out about it through them.
Is there a restraint of trade case to be made about that, Phil? And I guess this goes back to the case in Ohio where they were saying, well, we don't have a responsibility to say anything about that. Having their cake and eating it too, it seems. But could a case be made that, I guess it would have to be their members or some members bringing some sort of suit against AARP for restraint of trade if there was an insurance company that offered a policy that should have been heard of by seniors?
Well, I mean, they're a private organization, so I think they can have an exclusive endorsement deal, licensing deal, like the one they have. I think the issue becomes one of whether they're engaged in deceptive marketing practices and whether they're clearly disclosing what it is they're doing, and that is subject to ongoing litigation in a lot of states. A lot of people do feel they've been defrauded and deceived, and so we're going to continue to track those cases, although the one we thought was the most promising has been dismissed. So we'll keep watching it. There certainly are a number of other ongoing cases, so people are trying to make legal theories to get after that, but so far not successfully.
Well, and certainly you're right in that in the organizations, but transparency so often is the issue. Do you think there's anything in this ruling in Ohio that could be used to help make a stronger case in some other jurisdiction against AARP? And United Healthcare.
Well, I think it's very helpful in, sort of the jurisdiction we're in right now, the court of public opinion. I mean, I think most people would be shocked to learn that when they get sued by a member who says they were, essentially defrauding me and I didn't know that they were getting a 5% VIG off the top of these insurance deals and they had this exclusive arrangement, their response is, we have no fiduciary obligation to our members. This is an ordinary business relationship. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people would be shocked and appalled to learn that AARP sees their relationship with them as members as an ordinary business relationship to just, sell whatever's most profitable for them.
It's interesting. We carry several financial advisors radio programs, and they will spend a long time, rattling off all of the, disclaimers and all the things that have to go through their compliance department. Yet they still seem to, glowingly talk about AARP, despite, some of them getting quite handily up on their soapbox to rail against people who aren't fiduciaries and don't, live up to their fiduciary responsibility. I guess it's that power of the bully pulpit, knowing that there's an awful lot of, I guess in this case, listeners or even perhaps customers that go through AARP. So I guess, it's up to you and me, Phil.
Well, we're trying, and I appreciate you having me on this topic. It's, it's not at the top of everyone's mind right now, but, to the extent that they're still a huge 800-pound gorilla in the room every time we have healthcare reform debates in Washington and in state capitals, for that matter. We're not going to win any of the policy fights we have until people understand, more about who they are and what they're doing.
Well, and as you mentioned at the onset, maybe in the case of COVID-19, I don't recall AARP being very upset with Andrew Cuomo in New York for moving COVID patients into senior living facilities, which not only are not hospitals, but have rudimentary and first echelon health treatment facilities, not nearly as intense as a hospital. But the governor seemed to be fine with that, and saw most of New York's deaths happen in those facilities, and crickets from AARP.
Real tragedy. We have 7 states that had versions of that policy: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Illinois, and Michigan. They've got about 20% of the U.S. population and nearly 60% of all of the COVID deaths. And the death rates are so much higher among that population than even among seniors, as I mentioned, who are not in long-term care facilities. That really is the difference between states that successfully limited this disease and those who failed, is how they handled that issue. And as I said, they have weighed in on it a little bit, but belatedly and reluctantly, it seems. And you got to wonder, how much senior advocacy they actually do, when I probably personally have done more to advocate on that issue than they have as a nearly $1 billion organization.
Yeah, and you don't have any members. Oh, well, you do. American Commitment is a great organization.
Hit the donation button. We'll cash any check.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's we're a tiny organization compared.
Well, we thank you for what you do, Phil Kerpen, president of American Commitment. Great piece. We'll share it. AARP to seniors. We're not accountable to you. Like you said, let's scream it from the highest mountaintops, and maybe people will hear it this time. Thank you, sir. God bless, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
All right. Have a good one.
Now, one would wonder if the same thing was true in, say, a group that was supposed to be leading the black community, what the outcry might be these days, or perhaps even if you found out that the police unions were doing it. There's that word again, union. Coming up next, Steve Greenhut, resident senior fellow and Western Regional Director for R Street, on police unions. Next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.